Yep, Joe Rogan's a great guy, great podcast, but not as good as this podcast right here, Hagen.
That's right.
Welcome to the Calvary Chapel Salmon podcast. Hagen, how you doing this morning?
Pretty good. This podcast will drop in a week from now, but today is the day after Halloween.
Yes.
Woke up this morning and no toilet paper on the house, so that's a good sign, I guess.
Okay, yeah.
There's
always a danger.
Yeah, you'd think that maybe people like you and me might be targeted by the teenagers.
Maybe.
But I've never been toilet papered.
Yeah. I think you really had to dislike someone to toilet paper them. Like, that's not like a prank you do to people you like. I pranked you in the past on your birthday twice, actually. But it's always like, these are like cute pranks that we do to people that we like. Like, we put sticky notes all over Hagen's office, and then last year we put 1 million balloons in your truck.
Yeah,
kind of annoying
a
stuff.
A very nice prank. A bunch of balloons in your truck, so that when you wake up on Sunday morning to go to church, you have to deal with all these balloons somehow, and it's January, mind you, so it's freezing. So yeah, much more better than just dealing with toilet paper that I could use, by the way.
Reusable, yes. Well, Hagen, did you just survive the most darkest day of the year?
It was not bad. Yeah, we had a good time at our hot dog feeding, and saw a lot of people come through, and got a good group of people serving. And the other thing about this podcast and the beauty of technology, because we always record these generally a week ahead of time, by the time this drops, we will know who will be our next president of the United States. Now, we're living in a state of naivety.
Yes.
We don't know, but when you're listening to this, you'll be like, oh man, things are changing no matter what.
Hopefully we know, and hopefully it's not. We're still counting the votes in Georgia or something like that. Then
that's right.
That'll be very silly. Yes. So Hagen, do you want to make a prediction right now? Ingrain it in stone?
We should, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say...
I know what I want.
Yeah, for sure.
I know what I'd like to see. And honestly, I believe that Donald Trump will win. I really do believe that right now.
That's hard. Because everyone who I know that we kind of listen to maybe in conservative media is saying that. But then I listened to or I watched this live video from the Washington Post or whatever, and everyone in their live chat was like, Kamala's going to win. So it's hard for me because it's oh wait, everyone in their circle is convinced that Kamala's going to win.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a weird bubble because if Trump wins, the Kamala people are going to say it's rigged, and if Kamala wins, then the Trump people are going to say it's rigged.
Sure.
And so it's a very hard situation because everyone's just convinced there's no way we could lose.
Sure. I mean, I literally had someone tell me earlier this week, if Trump doesn't win, then they cheated.
Yeah.
And it's of course you believe that.
Yeah.
But then they believe the opposite. Yeah. So what
hard.
do you do? And that's the problem when you can no longer trust the election process, because then no one truly grabs a hold of or receives who the elected person is anymore, because it's just cheated.
I remember, who did Obama beat the first time?
Mitt Romney. Which, mind you, I'm actually glad Obama won over Mitt Romney, because don't get me started on that guy.
Well, anyways, I remember, and I was 2008, 2004? No, 2008. So I was 5 years old.
Wow.
And this is a very early Jordan memory. I remember my mom sitting me and my brothers down, and we watched Mitt Romney, after he lost, shake Obama's hand and admit defeat, basically. And my mom was maybe she was a big Mitt Romney fan, I don't know, but my mom was this is how you lose.
Oh, I'm sure it is. You know why? Because Mitt Romney is on the same team as Barack Obama.
No,
please.
I don't know. Yeah,
he's a rhino, Republican in name only. What a loser. But that's not what this podcast is about today.
Yes.
We're talking about right now politics, earthly stuff. But today we don't want to talk about earthly stuff. We want to talk about
heavenly things,
such as specifically
heaven itself.
Yes. That's right. Today we want to talk about heaven. Last week we talked about hell. Today, heaven. Jordan, when you think of heaven, what do you think of?
A day with you, Hagen.
Wow. Yes.
That's heaven on earth. No.
Yes.
Well, sometimes I think about sitting on clouds with angels playing harps. That's kind of the idea that when heaven, and when I'm maybe because that's what cartoons kind of portray for you growing up. Heaven is this place where we're all just kind of singing. sometimes I think of heaven maybe as just like this super long worship service.
Okay.
Where we're just kind of all in this big church room and we're all just singing and Jesus is on stage leading worship or something. Or maybe he's being worshiped and we're just kind of singing forever. Those are some of the ideas that pop into my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, heaven is a concept that our culture actually, for the most part, likes. And through... especially around the holiday season. You know, you got these Hallmark movies that are like all about like an angel comes and visits and or your grandpa, you know, all these weird kind of ideas around Hollywood or specifically Hallmark or even country music that we have these concepts of heaven.
Yes.
And the Bible says things about heaven, but honestly, it doesn't say a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, this is not a book full of heaven. It's a book full of getting us to heaven.
Yeah.
But as far as like what heaven actually is, those passages are more limited than someone who maybe doesn't know the word might think. So we have glimpses, we have pieces, we have parts that we can put together as far as what we have to look forward to. And I think we'll get into some of that here this morning. But heaven is really what it's all about.
For sure.
I mean, heaven is where we're going.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing that I think that we can realize. We're going to heaven. If you're a believer in Jesus, we're going to heaven. He doesn't just save us so we can go to church. He didn't just save us so that we can read our Bibles. He saved us because we're going to be somewhere for eternity, and that place is with him. And that place is called heaven. So heaven, I guess we could say, is God's dwelling place.
Yeah,
that's a good definition, right?
Or just God's presence. And there's a lot of details we could talk about heaven, but when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, heaven is experiencing God's presence.
Yeah.
And like in Psalm chapter 16, verse 11, it says, in his presence, there's fullness of joy. When we're with God, see him face to face, we will have the maximum amount of joy that we are capable of having. We will have that when we are just in his presence. And we can have tastes of that now. We can experience his presence now. That's important to realize. But when we get to heaven, it will be clear and we will have fullness of joy. And so that's kind of a good basic starting point for talking about heaven. It's his presence, and that's where joy comes from.
That I like, because when you talk to people about heaven, we have strange concerns about heaven. And I mean, they're legitimate, they're valid, but I think when we get there, we'll realize that was a strange worry of mine. Because people will say, well, could I really enjoy heaven knowing that maybe some of my loved ones aren't here? Or could I really enjoy heaven if my dog's not there or not? And we're not making a definitive statement either way. Could I really enjoy heaven if there's not skiing or cookies or Gibson guitars or Toyota Tacomas, whatever your thing is? And it's like, in his presence is fullness of joy. Whatever heaven is, it's whatever those things do for you to the fullest. You get joy from your dog, you get joy from your family, you get joy from these great recreational activities. You're experiencing joy. Heaven, his presence, is fullness of joy. So you're not going to be in the presence of Jesus and be like, man, I just really wish fill in the blank.
And I think that's where like the Hollywood or Hallmark movies kind of do us a disservice, because we imagine, oh, heaven is the place where I get to be with my family. And like that's kind of the emphasis. Like heaven's where grandpa is and I'm going to go be with grandpa. It's like that's true in a sense if grandpa believed in Jesus.
Sure.
That's true in a sense, but the point of heaven, the emphasis of heaven, the thing that will make heaven awesome is his presence, and grandpa and everything else is just a side thing that you'll also get to experience. But the main crux of it is Jesus. So Hagen, from the Bible, there's a lot we don't know about heaven, but what do we know about heaven from the Bible, besides just that we'll be with God forever?
Well, we know that the current heaven is not the forever heaven.
Yeah.
In Revelation 21, and do you have that on your list?
I do have this on the list. Do you want me
Okay.
to read Revelation 21?
No, I can read it. I have it open right here. In Revelation 21, this is one of the more detailed descriptions of what we have to look forward to for eternity. So, in a couple of weeks, we'll do a podcast on the end times, which will help with some of this. I don't want to go down this too much, but here's the quick gist of things. Right now, any believer that dies goes to be with the presence of the Lord, to heaven.
Yeah.
That's a fair statement. Any believer that dies, their spirit goes to be with Jesus. Their body goes to the ground, gets cremated, gets eaten by bears, whatever happened, right? Mm-hmm. Their body stays on earth. Their spirit and soul, who they really are, goes to heaven. The day is coming where their body and spirit will be reunited. We call that the resurrection, which is the same event of the rapture, by the way. We'll talk about that on another podcast. Resurrected body with your spirit. That place where people who you love, who believe in Jesus, have already died, they're in heaven right now in the presence of Jesus, but that heaven is not the heaven we're going to be forever. Mm. We know that because Revelation 21 tells us that after we come back with Jesus in his second coming, there's a literal 1,000-year reign of Jesus on this earth, us in our glorified bodies helping him. There's then a new heaven and a new earth, because the first heaven and the first earth pass away, he says, Revelation 21 verse 1. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also, there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle, or the dwelling place of God, is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Then he who sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, it's done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, and I will give the fountains of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. That eternal heaven after the millennial kingdom, the new heaven and the new earth, where we all live happily ever after, is actually a mesh of heaven and earth. The new heaven and the new earth become like one. This holy city, Jerusalem, comes down out of heaven, where we'll be kind of dwelling in. God is there. The dwelling place of God is with man. God is with his people. That's heaven. Yeah. And we get to spend eternity there.
You know what I heard in Bible college once?
What?
The new Jerusalem, like it comes down to the earth, like heaven and earth meet. Heaven and earth meet, like a sloppy wet kiss, that song, the idea.
My favorite.
But the idea, this one guy in Bible college, I don't think he believed this, but he said the new earth, the new heaven, the new city Jerusalem might just be the moon. Because he did the diameters, because we get the diameters of the holy city in Revelation. It's actually kind of close to the moon, and so he thinks God remakes the moon and it comes down.
That's a little wild.
Yes. That's a little wild. Yes. But I like that, and I think that's kind of important for people to understand the timeline. And again, we'll get into it a lot when we talk about the end times. But the idea is, okay, if you were to die today, you would go to heaven, but you wouldn't have a new body. You'd be a disembodied spirit. And again, I think cartoons do us a disservice because we think of a outline of our bodies, but just kind of faded out.
Right.
Yeah. That's probably not what a spirit looks like. We don't know. It's a spirit.
Do you think my spirit has a beard? I sure hope so.
Yeah. And we talked about this on the way over. The idea of hardware and software. Right now we're recording this podcast using these SD cards, which are these little plastic things. And those little plastic things weigh, I don't know, not very much, an ounce or something like that. I don't know. But if you were to load up that SD card with a whole bunch of memory and information and data, it would still weigh an ounce. The hardware doesn't change, but the software goes in and out. We're hardware. These bodies are hardware. We have a spirit, a soul, which is software. And when the spirit and soul leaves, the body doesn't change, but the software, the information, the who you are, goes to somewhere else, goes to heaven. And so we're in heaven as these disembodied spirits. And then the big deal is the resurrection. And then we rule and reign with Christ here on this earth for 1,000 years. And that's kind of and sometimes we maybe brush over that point to try and just get to the end. But ruling and reigning on this earth with Jesus is a big deal. And we can talk about this idea of like rewards, heavenly rewards. Like as we're ruling and reigning on this earth, Jesus talks about how there will be a hierarchy. There will be different authorities given. There will be different levels of rewards given based upon our faithfulness here. We won't all have the same jobs in heaven. We won't all have the same jobs during this 1,000-year reign of Christ. There will be a difference of authority. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And what I like about this Revelation 21 thing is when you think of heaven and earth coming together and that's where we're going to be forever, it takes away because heaven for us right now is like imaginatory. So like we try to picture it, but we try to picture it and it's going to be different than earth, but I think it'll be more like earth than we think.
Yes.
It'll be like heaven is life forever. Right now we're living life. We're living temporal lives that have an expiration date as far as on the hardware before we get an upgrade in the resurrection. But everything is temporary. So we try to picture heaven, this imaginatory, like existential, like dream world. But it's not a dream world. It's reality. Heaven is more reality than now. And so when you think about heaven, think about it like as it's realer than life is right now. It's ultimate reality forever.
And we have bodies. We have bodies just like this one's, but just upgrades, just better, stronger, faster, smarter,
without sin,
without
temptation, in the presence of Jesus. Like it's just going to be great.
It will be doing things. One of my old youth pastors back in Philadelphia, he talked about there's a new heavens and a new earth, right? Creating those two meet. But the Bible also describes heavens as like the galaxies, the stars, the heavens. Like that's another term used. And so the idea is there's going to be this new that. And I believe we'll get to explore God's new creation. Just like when God created Adam and Eve, hey, go out, explore my creation. And God gave Adam and Eve jobs to do too. I think when there's a new heavens and new earth, we'll get to be in his presence, we'll get to worship him, but there will also be this idea of I'm going to go and enjoy this new creation, this new heaven, the new earth that God made. And I like just imagine me and you, Hagen, in this rocket ship going around the galaxies, exploring the new creation that God made. And it's like this idea, like, and it kind of breaks the mold of, heaven will just be this really long worship service where we're just singing and singing and singing. Yes, worship will be a part of it. But there's also, like you said, this life, jobs, where we got things to do. We'll be exploring, we'll be appreciating God's beauty and his glory in all these different ways, added on to the fact that we'll be singing to him, but in all these other ways, there'll be variety there.
Sure, and in the same way that right now in this world, in this life, as Christians, our job is to bring God glory. We're not just always sitting around singing.
Yes.
We get to do that. That's part of worship, but worship gets to be our whole life. As we work, as we interact with people, we're supposed to be bringing God glory. We're going to be able to ultimately bring him glory in heaven. Now, Jordan, there's some things in heaven we don't get to do. One of those is obviously sin.
Yes.
We're a new creation. We're resurrected. We're not going to have a sin nature. But even more specifically, where I'm trying to get to is we're not going to be able to evangelize in heaven because everyone in heaven is going to say, I know. Have you heard about Jesus? Yeah, that's why I'm here. Everyone in heaven already knows the Lord. So evangelism is something that only gets to happen here. We get to worship in heaven. I am assuming, we're going to study God in heaven. We'll have Bible studies in a sense, but we'll have him and his presence and the completion of it all now in a mere dimly, then face to face. But really the one thing that we get to do now as believers that will not be possible in eternity is sharing Jesus with someone who doesn't know him yet. So do that now while you can.
For sure. Yeah, because you won't be able to later. I like what you said. We'll get to study God for all eternity, because sometimes if you really sit back and think about the idea of infinity, eternity, it's a little intimidating. It's a little daunting because it's like, wait, forever. Like we're going to be in heaven for 10 billion years. and then it's going to keep going. Right. And it's like, won't you get bored? Like, won't you, like, and it's hard because if you do anything on this earth for 10 billion years, you'll get bored of it. Yeah. And then it almost turns into hell at that point. It's like, oh no, I'm running out, like I'm here forever. Yeah. But the idea of we get to study God, we get to worship and appreciate God for all eternity, and God is in and of himself infinite. Will never get bored. In Revelation chapter 4, verse 8, we get the throne room in heaven, and around the throne there's these 4 living creatures, each with 6 wings and all these eyes around them, and they're just constantly flying around God, worshiping him. And the way I described to me, and I like this, every time they see something about God, every time they see God, they see something that blows their mind, and they just fall down and worship and say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. These divine beings who surely know way more about God than we do, who surely know way more about the insights of God and eternity, they are studying God forever and ever and ever, and they always find something new and amazing that blows their minds, and they worship God. And that goes on forever because God in of himself is infinite. There's always something new to fall in love with. There's always something new to appreciate, and we'll just get to do that forever. So it'll never get boring because we'll always have something new to love about God. God will always show us something new about himself that will just blow our minds. And yeah,
when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun,
yes,
we know less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
That's good.
There will always be there's not going to be a staleness to our relationship with Jesus for eternity. And the other weird thing about eternity is we think eternity is a really, 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 really long time. But it's actually timeless. Yeah. It's now outside of time, no longer bound by time. And we can't even really grasp what that means. Yeah. But yeah, eternity is not just like a long time. It just is. And there's no ending. And it's not just like, oh, I'm getting closer to the end of eternity. Like I think Buzz Lightyear said, to infinity and beyond.
Yes.
It's just, there's no beyond infinity, actually.
Yeah.
It just is. And it's like, that really twists your brain too.
Yeah, we can't relate
because
to that.
Because everything we relate to is in time. Yeah. Although I do know some people that time seems to be irrelevant to them, and that's a whole other thing.
Some people are kind of in this time.
You're living in eternity now, aren't you?
Yes.
You have no concept of time.
You do not care one bit. Yes. Do you think sometimes people say things as far as heaven, they'll say things maybe as like, well, or they'll ask questions like, will I recognize people in heaven? Will I remember this life in heaven? Questions like that. What would you say to people like that? Because I've heard those things before.
1 Corinthians 13, I will be known just as I am known. Just as I know, or whatever.
Yeah.
I will know just as I am known. My short, kind of smart aleck answer, but I'm serious, is you won't be dumber in heaven than you are on earth. So if you think you're going to get to heaven and be stupider than you are now, it's like, that's not going to work. So yeah, I don't think that, I think we will reminisce on this life. Remember when we launched that podcast? Remember when and we'll talk about those things and the things the Lord did through us now and seeing full picture on how he used us.
Yeah.
I think that'll be part of bringing him glory. Because I mean, you can spend an awful long, back to our word, time in heaven just reevaluating your life here on earth and all those little details and dots that God connected and the people he brought into your life and the miracles that he did. Like, that'll take up some time in the place where there is no time.
And that's something cool. We'll even be able to see the value in all the bad things that happen to us.
Sure.
Yeah, and that's going to be cool to see. And sometimes people think, well, how could it be heaven if I'll be able to remember this traumatic experience I had? Like this awful, awful thing I had. If it's truly heaven, I need to forget that. And I was like, well, no, you'll be able to think about that from God's perspective and see that even though it was bad, God used it in amazing ways, maybe not just in your life, but in other people's life. And you'll be able to see things that you never even thought of. We'll be able to see in heaven the nail prints in Jesus' hands. Revelation talks about we'll be able to see the lamb like he was slaughtered. And so for all eternity, we'll be able to understand. We won't get to heaven and say, Jesus, why do you got those nail prints in your hands? No, we'll know, and we'll know that our sin caused that, and then we'll be able to see the depths of his love for all eternity. And that's kind of a reason why we're going through this right now, because right now we're able to sin and make mistakes and see evil, but that's necessary so that for all eternity we can see his forgiveness and his love. If we didn't experience this now, if we were just to be born and go to heaven, we wouldn't have any idea of Jesus' forgiveness. So that's kind of an important idea. Like right now is necessary so that we can know, oh, God does love me enough to die for me, even though I was a wretch and I didn't deserve it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's actually a song, I think by I Am They, called Scars. And the chorus goes, I'm thankful for the scars, because without them I wouldn't know your heart.
Yeah.
And they'll always tell of who you are. So forever I am thankful for the scars. And the genius of that song is first is talking about the scars in their life that they go through the hard times. And then they flip it onto Jesus, how for all eternity we see his scars and they declare who he is and what he's done for us.
Yeah.
And just 2 weeks ago, during worship, during second service, someone came up to me and was asking me about this idea of Jesus being as a lamb as though he was slain. And I was explaining the value of that, because it'll be impossible for all eternity for us to lay eyes on Jesus and not be reminded visually of his love for us. Every time we see him, we will know that he loves us because he bears the marks of eternity. And then the question was back to me, well, we're supposed to be perfect in heaven, so will we have our scars? Like, I don't know. All I know is he has his. And I know that because of what John says. So will you still have, the scars on your body, or will yours be gone? Don't care about your body. I care about his.
Yeah.
And his body will declare his love for us for eternity. And that's the thing. And if you think about heaven, if you think about the garden, if the Garden of Eden would have continued on without Adam and Eve sinning, and try to relate that to heaven, that helps us better understand what I'll call the reality of heaven. So they're in a garden, they're human beings, they're living, they're working, they're enjoying God's creation. That was God's intent, right? I have these creatures made in my image, and they can enjoy my fellowship for as long as possible, except for they chose to sin and disobey God. So if you play this game of, well, if they would have never sinned, we'd stay in the Garden of Eden, sin wouldn't have entered the world, we would just continue on, and this would be great, and it would be great. But there's one thing that we know now because of sin that we wouldn't know nearly as well if we would have never went through life, the sequence of events of how they happened. And that is this idea of, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve knew that God loved them. And they know that God loves them because he tells them. I'm reading into it a little bit, but I love you. Thank you. We know that God loves us, not just because he tells us, and he does tell us. We know that God loves us because he showed us. And that's huge. And I like this idea because eternity, heaven, is not just getting back to the garden. It's not just going back to the Garden of Eden. Heaven now is better than the original plan, if you will. It's better than the first model.
Yeah.
Heaven 2.0 is better than if we just would have stayed in the Garden of Eden for perfection forever. We now have, and it's the whole Romans 8 thing, God works all things together for good. And it's going to be better. And I want to be careful saying this, but literally this is what it is. Because of sin, Jesus is going to make it all better than it would have been even without sin.
Yeah.
Because that's the kind of God he is. So.
Yeah. Do you think, Hagen, we're all going to be equal in heaven? Talk about that maybe.
In a sense, yes.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that in this sense of at the foot of the cross, the ground is level.
Yeah. We're all there.
We're all only there for one reason. Yep. Anyone in heaven, when you ask them, why are you here, only has one answer to give. Because of him. Because of Jesus. No one, you're not meeting one person in heaven that goes, I'm here because I. No one will say that. They'll all have the proper perspective. You might be Christians here now who try to say that, right?
Yeah.
But it'll all be lined out that we're here because of him. I don't know. I personally kind of think that this whole idea of like the rewards, which we'll actually do a whole podcast on that maybe in a couple weeks. But I think that primarily applies to the kingdom age.
Yeah.
To me, that's just the simplest way of seeing it. And then as we're in heaven, it's much more. Well, here's the hierarchy in heaven: Jesus and everyone else. Mm-hmm. And if you're not Jesus, then guess who you are? You're just everyone else. Mm-hmm. And I like that simplicity. Whereas in the kingdom, before the new heaven and new earth, as we're still ruling and reigning on this planet, the Bible uses these teachings and things of you're faithful in little, I'm going to entrust you with more, greater responsibility. We're going to help rule and reign with him. So that I see are positional rewards and action during that kingdom age. But for all eternity, I don't quite know what that looks like. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like that. That makes sense. How about, because I thought about it before as far as like relationally, like I have this relationship with Jesus now, and that relationship with Jesus is going to continue into heaven. And I'll get closer to Jesus as I'm in heaven.
Sure.
But maybe it would be fair to say if there's a Christian who's saved, but they're not very close to Jesus, they get to heaven and their starting point is where they left off here on earth.
Okay.
And so like if you're closer to Jesus now, that's where you pick up. And for all eternity, or again, going back to time, it's a little confusing. We go and we fall more in love with Jesus for all eternity, but there's a starting point. Like I don't like the idea of we all just kind of get to heaven and then it's all just like we're all just like instantly super close to Jesus, like as if our closeness here on earth didn't matter one bit. Like I think there's this idea of like you pick up where you left off, and you have all eternity to get closer and fall in love with him, but what your relationship with Jesus now matters, and how close you are with him now will reflect itself in some ways for all eternity.
Yeah, and just like in your life right now, you have a different relationship with me than other people. And to just pretend like everyone in heaven has the same relationship with Jesus right away, that's like robotish kind of, you know?
Yeah.
There's a uniqueness, there's a relational, there's an identity of we're all, just like we're all on our own walk here, we're all learning and growing. And today in heaven, I was really flabbergasted by this aspect of Jesus, but you were focused on this aspect. And then the next day, again, hard, I'm learning about this part and you're learning about this part. And it's just, there's a uniqueness.
Yeah. I like that. I don't have the same relationship with Jesus as Billy Graham did. And not to say that Billy Graham's was better than mine or mine was worse, but it's just different. And so, So I guess the motivation is have as good a relationship with Jesus now because it's the relationship you're going to have with him in heaven.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Abraham's bosom, Hagen? What's up with that idea?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Well, that comes from a teaching in Luke, right?
Yep.
Of the rich man and Lazarus. And the rich man goes to Hades, and Lazarus goes to Abraham's bosom, it says. And this whole teaching unfolds that gives us some interesting information about separation from God and what people will believe if people come back from the dead.
Yeah.
But from that concept, there's been some interesting ideas that Christians have come to as to what is this Abraham's bosom. One interpretation is that it is a holding place. It's a place where Old Testament believers went. Let's say this way. It's a place where people who were God's people went before the cross. And the argument is they couldn't actually go to heaven where God's presence is because the sacrifice hasn't been made yet. So they're in this holding place, Abraham's bosom, until after Jesus dies on the cross. And then they tie in some verses from maybe like Ephesians that talk about how he led captivity captive. So Jesus then goes to Abraham's bosom after he dies on the cross, this spiritual holding place, leads all the captivity captive. Come on up, guys. You guys can all come to where my father is now, because I finally paid the ultimate price. And now Abraham's bosom is void or empty or ceases to exist. And when someone who believes in Jesus dies, they go straight to heaven. That's one interpretation of trying to fit all those passages together. That is not the simplest view.
Yeah.
And generally, when I try to interpret the Bible, I try to look what's the simplest view without having to draw a spider web throughout God's word to make sense of it all.
Yeah.
So another view is what? That it's just heaven. It's just another word to describe heaven.
Abraham's bosom could be Abraham's side, or even the NLT just says with Abraham.
It's you're just in the same place where Abraham is, and so maybe it's not as complicated as some people have made it throughout the years.
You're not going around Abraham's chest hair.
Yikes. That's right.
Yeah.
And those Middle Eastern guys are hairy.
Yeah. Yeah, you're just with Abraham. Where would Abraham be?
So are those Philadelphia guys, though.
For sure, yeah. Yep. Genesis 15:6, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him for righteousness. It would seem that Abraham was saved, not in the same way that we are saved, but he had the righteousness of Christ accounted to him, put into his account.
By faith.
Kind
Which
of
is the same way for us.
Yeah, in the same way. Yeah, exactly. Kind of on credit, right? Like Jesus hadn't died yet.
Sure.
But like in Matthew chapter 9, it talks about how Jesus forgives the paralytic man, says, hey, your sins are forgiven you. Well, how could Jesus forgive his sins if he hadn't died on the cross yet? Well, outside of time, and Jesus can do that, and he's kind of like on credit, like you're eating a meal at a restaurant, you don't pay for the meal until the end. That's right. And so like you just like looking forward,
unless it's Chipotle or Subway.
Yeah, they make you do that. But if you go and sit down, the bill comes
a real
at the
restaurant.
End. Yeah, real restaurant. Yeah. So I agree. I think the simplest view would be, because then you kind of get into this idea that Abraham's bosom and hell are both kind of in the center of the earth and they're right next to each other, kind of, right?
Yeah, that's a whole other idea.
That's a whole other idea. It's the center of the earth.
I know that I know a lot of people that hold to the Abraham's bosom view being a holding place. Actually, most of the people that I know or listen to believe that. And that's fine.
Yeah.
Because now it kind of doesn't matter. But personally, they just spend a lot of time talking about that when they're teaching that passage. And it's like, maybe you don't need to spend that much time talking about something that we're not quite sure about.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. Any other thoughts on heaven, Hagen?
Well, heaven's real.
Yeah.
That's where we get to go.
Yeah.
That's where we get to enjoy Jesus forever. That's what we're looking forward to. The Bible and James refers to this life as like a vapor. It's just here today, and before you know it, it's gone. And we have eternity to look forward to. And that mindset, that worldview is given to us as Christians to help us endure through the sucky parts of this life.
Yeah.
And people can say, well, that's just escapism. That's just, you need to think about now. And I do think needs to be a bit of a balance of I think God wants you to enjoy this life. I do. I think when we get to eternity, we're going to look back on this life like I talked about on that Sunday message of 1 Corinthians 13 and be like, man, we did a lot of childish things. Right now it's childish.
Yeah.
When we get there, when we're full grown, we're going to look back on our child phase and be like, man, we were silly.
Yeah.
One of the things I often say is, I think when we get to heaven, we're going to look back on the decisions we made on earth, particularly when it came to extending our life, and think that we were pretty silly. It's like, why would I want to take all these drugs, be on all these machines to have such a low quality of life when this is what was awaiting me when I took my last breath?
Yeah.
Like, why would I want to live to be 100 years old when from 90 to 100, my life sucked and I just sat in an old folks home forever and they just kept feeding me pills and putting me on machines? I really think that view that we have of life is going to be challenged one day.
Yeah.
And it'll be like, man.
Yeah. One of the things I like about heaven is in Luke chapter 9, Jesus talks about how all things are going to come into the light. How everything, every single secret, every single thing people believed or said, everyone's going to know everything.
Yeah.
No more secrets, no more drama, no more did you hear what this person did or did you hear what that person said? It's just all going to be out there in the light. Yeah, and I just like that because people can say things and believe things now, and sometimes it's like, I can't believe that person would believe that about me or say that about me, and it can really rub us the wrong way. But it's just like, well, just wait. Because in heaven, everyone's going to believe the truth, and whether those things were true about you or not, everyone's going to have the right idea. There's not going to be any misconceptions in heaven.
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of like, you don't need to defend yourself now. You don't need to be worrying about what other people think about you now, because one day the record's going to be set straight. Yeah. And it's not up to you to go make sure that everyone believes the correct things about you now, like on Facebook or whatever. Sure. Yeah, you can just say, you know what? Everyone's going to believe the right thing one day, and I'm just going to do my thing. And yeah, there's peace there.
Yeah, sometimes people, I know it's hard to believe, sometimes people are critical of us, Jordan.
Of us?
Of us, even people like you and me. And sometimes this podcast doesn't help with the things that we kind of have fun with about. But at the end of the day, generally the things you feel the most desire to defend yourself on are the things you're most insecure about, or the things that really are your weak spots. And there's been times when people have challenged me about specific things that they think I should have done that I didn't do. And I really have learned to not let that bother me one bit, because I know what I am doing. And there's very few people who know fully what we do. And you and I know the most about what we do together. But because there can be this criticism that I've gotten before from a few people that have been disappointed in a way that I dealt with things. And this has nothing to do with heaven now, but since we're talking about it, let's air it out. It was like, well, you might be a good Bible teacher, but there's much more to being a pastor than just teaching the Bible. And you need to, be more engaged in people's lives. And my response is, you just don't know. And maybe I dropped the ball in that area for you, but you and I know the people that we take wood to. You and I know the people that we help move furniture for. You and I know literally multiple times a week, there's people in our church that we love, that we are doing things for, that anyone could look at and say, that should be for the deacons, that should be for other, and it's like other people could do it, but we're just going to do it now and have it done with, and it blesses us and it blesses them. And, heaven will clear all that stuff up. Yep. So it'll be like, how come, or people doubt your motives, and it's like, you just have no idea.
Yeah.
And I don't even know. And you don't even know.
Yep.
And it'll all just be straightened out one day.
It'll all be straightened out. I like that. Well, I'm glad you were able to get that off your chest, Hagen.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool.
So heaven, the thing that's keeping you out of heaven is you. It's you not receiving Jesus. So if you don't know Jesus, that's why you need to know him.
Yep.
Because you're not going to get to know him if you don't know him. Yeah. And you get to know him now so that you can know him for eternity. And that's what believing in him is about. That's what calling out for him in faith is about. It's starting an eternal relationship now that's going to carry on to, like Jordan referenced, forever. So that's why Jesus is important. That's why knowing him is important. That's why having your sin dealt with by him is important. It's not just about I no longer have guilt now. That's a benefit of being forgiven, but it's much bigger and deeper than we often think.
Yep. Cool. Good talk, Hagen.
Another thing real quick, and we will end this. I just had this realization once the other day when I was meeting up with a friend. I walked away, and later on I was just thinking about the whole situation, and I thought, we're going to be in heaven together.
Aw.
It was just like, it's like, it's fun to get together now.
Yeah.
But it's like, we're going to be in heaven together.
That is a good thought. Yes.
It's like, we're going to be in heaven together.
Yeah.
And it's just fun.
Yeah.
To come to that.
It is fun. And it's also very comforting because there's so many people that's like, I wish I could just spend more time with you and get to know you better.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, we live in different parts of the world, whatever.
You were born in different times of history.
Yeah.
I wish I could get to know,
Yeah.
Daniel Boone.
Even just like family members now. It's just like, I will have all eternity with you. And that's an awesome thing. That's an amazing thing. And that's a very comforting idea.
Yeah. So it sucks that you're not going to have Thanksgiving with maybe your family, but you'll have eternity to have it with them, right?
Yes, the in-laws.
Little things like that. It reminds me, this is the last story. When we moved from our building on Church Street, our little building, what we call the Heritage Center now, over to the building on Main Street, we thought we would just be able to do one service. And we did that for less than a month, and it was just full, way too full. So when I had to get up in front of the church and break the news to them that we're going back to 2 services, I told them, we're going to go back to 2 services. And, people are like, because it's nice, we're all together, but there's 0 room for growth. I said, but here's the good news. You'll get to spend eternity together. So right now we're going to be separate so that we can spend eternity together with even more people.
There you go.
That's a good perspective.
That is a good perspective, yes. Cool.
I'm done. I'm done talking about heaven.
That's good. Cool. Bye, guys.
See ya.